It was the kind of night that would live in the pages of history, not because of the grandeur of the event or the powerful names that filled the room, but because of a single quiet moment that spoke louder than any speech. The commander-in-chief's ball was alive with energy. Glittering chandeliers reflected the opulence of the occasion, and the air buzzed with the mingling voices of military leaders, politicians, and dignitaries. But all of that faded into the background as the spotlight shifted to one corner of the grand hall. Melania Trump, the new First Lady, was a vision of elegance in her white gown that flowed like a whisper with every step she took. Her grace was effortless, yet commanding, as though she carried the weight of expectations without letting it dim her poise. She was moving toward a man who stood at attention, every muscle taut under the immaculate uniform of a U.S. Army sergeant. Sergeant John Davis was a man used to battles, not ballrooms. A career soldier stationed at Fort Carson, Colorado, John had spent years honing his skills in the chaos of military drills and the silence of desert nights. Yet nothing had prepared him for this moment, standing in the heart of Washington, D.C., as the embodiment of countless service members who watched from afar. The weight of their eyes, their hopes, and their pride pressed on him like the heaviest rucksack he had ever carried. The room fell into a hushed silence as the MC announced the first dance of the evening. Cameras shifted, lights dimmed, and all attention turned to the couple about to take the floor. John took a deep breath, running through the steps in his mind like a battlefield strategy. Right, left, pause. Keep your shoulders loose. Don't overthink it. When Melania Trump reached him, her smile was soft but reassuring, a quiet strength that instantly eased some of the tension gripping his chest. She extended her hand, and he took it with the steady confidence of a soldier who had faced far greater fears. For a brief moment, the grand hall, the cameras, the weight of the moment, they all disappeared. It was just them and the music. The melody was timeless, a waltz that carried with it an air of dignity and tradition. As they began to sway, John focused on matching her rhythm, his polished boots moving carefully on the polished floor. Despite his nerves, his steps were steady, each one a testament to the discipline ingrained in him through years of service. The fabric of her gown brushed against his uniform as they moved, a reminder of the surreal intersection of their worlds. "Are you nervous?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible over the music. John let out a quiet laugh, surprising even himself. "A little," he admitted, "but I think my training has me covered." Her laughter was light, a sound that felt like a shared secret in a room full of people. "You're doing great," she said, and somehow, in that moment, he believed her. To the millions watching from their homes, the dance was a symbol, a soldier representing the strength of the military, a first lady embodying grace under pressure, and together, a fleeting image of unity in a divided nation. But to John, it was something far simpler and yet far more profound. It was two people, both carrying the weight of expectations, finding a moment of connection. The dance was over almost as quickly as it had begun. The final note of the music echoed through the hall, and applause erupted around them. John stepped back, releasing her hand and snapping into a crisp salute. She returned the gesture with a graceful nod before turning to walk back to the stage. As John exited the dance floor, his heart still pounding, he caught a glimpse of his own reflection on one of the large screens positioned around the room. It was surreal to see himself projected larger than life, his image frozen in a moment he knew he would never forget. But what John couldn't have anticipated was how this single dance, this fleeting moment of unity and grace, would ripple through his life in ways he could never have imagined. The applause followed him off the floor, but it wasn't just for him. It was for the idea he represented. A soldier standing tall in the face of scrutiny, a symbol of the countless men and women who served silently and selflessly. For John, the moment was deeply humbling, but it was only the beginning of a journey that would test him in ways far beyond the dance floor. As the applause faded, Sergeant John Davis stepped off the dance floor, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. His heart was still pounding, the surreal nature of what had just happened refusing to sink in. He had been in combat zones and tense military drills, but this, the glare of cameras, the eyes of millions watching, and the symbolic power of a single dance, was unlike anything he had ever experienced. He tried to blend into the crowd, to become invisible again, but it was impossible. Everywhere he turned, hands reached out to shake his, voices congratulated him, and flashes of cameras lit the room. His fellow soldiers stationed nearby grinned at him, some offering playful jabs. "You look like a natural out there, Davis," one said, clapping him on the back. John managed a polite smile, but inside, he felt out of place. The uniform he wore so proudly had always been his shield, a symbol of his duty, not his individuality. But tonight, it felt as though the world saw only him, not the thousands of service members he wanted to represent. By the time he returned to his hotel room, exhaustion had fully set in. He sat on the edge of the bed, still in his dress uniform, staring blankly at his phone. It buzzed incessantly, texts from family, friends, and even people he hadn't spoken to in years. His mother's text read, "I'm so proud of you, baby," while his sister sent a blurry photo of him on TV, captioned, "Our very own hero." Scrolling through social media, John was stunned to see clips of the dance going viral. Headlines hailed it as a moment of unity, while commentators debated its significance. He even spotted memes celebrating his composure and humorously speculating on his thoughts during the dance. But as the world reacted with excitement, John felt a growing unease. The days that followed thrust him into a whirlwind. Invitations to events poured in, media outlets clamored for interviews, and strangers stopped him on the street to thank him for his service. At first, it felt like a fleeting novelty, something that would fade as quickly as it had come. But as weeks turned into months, it became clear that the moment had cemented itself in the public consciousness. Within his own ranks, the reactions were mixed. While many of his fellow soldiers were proud of him, there were those who couldn't hide their resentment. "Guess we're all extras in the John Davis show now," one joked during training, his tone laced with bitterness. John brushed it off, focusing on his duties, but the comment stayed with him. He hadn't asked for this spotlight, and yet it had painted a target on his back. To make matters worse, the media's relentless attention began to chip away at his sense of privacy. Journalists dug into his background, searching for stories to sensationalize. Headlines painted him as everything from America's poster soldier to a political symbol, neither of which felt true to him. His family bore the brunt of the attention too. His parents, proud but overwhelmed, found themselves fielding questions from neighbors and strangers. His younger brother, still in high school, struggled with the sudden spotlight. "I'm proud of you," his brother admitted one evening, "but it's hard being John Davis's brother all the time." The turning point came when John was invited to speak at a military appreciation dinner. Standing on stage in front of hundreds of people, he felt the familiar nerves creeping in. This wasn't like the dance, where his movements were guided by music and tradition. Here, he had to speak, to articulate what the moment meant, not just to him, but to everyone who saw it. As he recounted the experience, John found himself stumbling over his words, grappling with the weight of what he was expected to represent. After the event, an older woman approached him, her eyes brimming with tears. "My husband served in Vietnam," she said softly. "He never got the recognition he deserved. Seeing you out there, it means the world to people like us." Her words hit John deeply, staying with him long after the applause had faded. He began to see the moment differently, not as a burden, but as an opportunity. It wasn't about him. It was about what he could represent for others. With this new perspective, John started accepting more speaking engagements. He shared not just his story but the stories of the countless service members who rarely received recognition. He spoke about the sacrifices of military families, the challenges of reintegration, and the resilience of those who served. One evening, after an event, a young Marine veteran approached him. The man's voice was shaky as he said, "Hearing you talk tonight, it reminded me why I joined in the first place. I've been struggling to find purpose since I got out, but you gave me hope." John shook his hand firmly. "You're not alone," he said. "None of us are. Remember that." Moments like this reaffirmed John's purpose. The dance had been a fleeting moment, but the platform it gave him allowed him to amplify voices that deserved to be heard. He became an advocate for veterans, using his newfound recognition to push for better resources and support systems. But the journey wasn't without challenges. The weight of his public image often felt suffocating. Balancing his military duties with his growing responsibilities as a public figure tested him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Journaling became his outlet, a way to process the whirlwind his life had become. In his writings, he reflected on the lessons he'd learned, not just from the dance but from his years of service. He thought of his grandfather's wisdom, the laughter of children in Afghanistan, and the quiet strength of his fellow soldiers. These moments reminded him of what truly mattered: connection, humanity, and service. Years later, John stood at a modest community gathering, far removed from the glitz of the commander-in-chief's ball. He wasn't there to talk about himself. Instead, he shared the stories of others, veterans, families, and unsung heroes who had shaped his journey. As he finished speaking, a woman approached him with her teenage son. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling, "for reminding people of the sacrifices behind the uniform. My husband didn't get to hear this, but I know he'd be proud." In that moment, John felt a deep sense of clarity. The dance had been just the beginning. What truly mattered was how he used that moment to lift others, to remind them of their own strength and resilience. For John, the lesson was clear. Life's defining moments aren't about recognition. They're about what you do with the opportunity. And as he looked toward the future, he knew his mission wasn't just to serve but to inspire others to find the best in themselves and each other.